Bonjour tout le monde, bienvenue à la conférence de presse. On a avec nous la vice-première ministre et ministre des Finances, Chrystia Freeland, et la ministre de l'Emploi, du Développement de la main-d'œuvre et de l'inclusion des personnes handicapées, Carla Qualtrough. Donc, elles vont dire quelques mots au sujet du projet de loi qui vient d'être déposé. Ensuite, on va prendre les questions dans la salle. Donc, c'est à vous.
Okay, bonjour tout le monde, and I'm really sorry to be starting late. Something came up, so many apologies, guys. I know you're all very busy. Okay, lorsque la crise de la COVID-19 a frappé, notre gouvernement a rapidement mis en place un ensemble de programmes à grande échelle et sans précédent afin de sauver des vies, de s'assurer que notre économie puisse traverser la crise et d'appuyer les travailleurs et les entreprises du Canada pendant la pandémie. Nos programmes de soutien de revenus, de subventions salariales et de subventions pour le loyer ont permis aux gens de mettre de la nourriture sur la table, ont contribué à protéger des millions d'emplois et ont maintenu à flotte des centaines de milliers d'entreprises canadiennes pendant les jours les plus sombres de la pandémie. Having said that, our emergency measures were always designed to be just that, measures for an emergency, and therefore necessarily temporary. With high vaccination rates, over 1 million jobs created, children back in school, and businesses across the country reopening, the time has come to adapt support measures to these new and improved circumstances. That's why in October, our government announced a pivot from the broad-based support that was appropriate at the height of lockdowns to more targeted support that will provide help where it is still needed, while also prudently and carefully managing government spending. And that's why today, just this afternoon, I introduced legislation in Parliament to deliver this more targeted support. Le projet de loi, c'est de nous permettre d'aller de l'avant tout en gardant en tête que la relance est encore inégale et que les mesures de santé publique qui permettent de sauver des vies continuent de restreindre certaines activités économiques. Parmi les mesures prévues dans le projet de loi figure la prestation canadienne pour les travailleurs en cas de confinement, une nouvelle prestation de revenus qui tient compte de la situation en matière de santé publique demeure incertaine et imprévisible. Cette prestation prévoit le versement de $300 par semaine aux travailleurs qui sont directement touchés par un ordre de confinement local lié à la COVID-19. Nous prenons cette mesure parce que nous voulons nous assurer que personne n'est laissé pour compte, y compris les travailleurs vulnérables qui, contre leur volonté, ne sont pas en mesure de travailler. Ce projet de loi propose également de prolonger jusqu'à 7 mai 2022 l'admissibilité à la prestation canadienne de maladie pour la relance économique et à la prestation canadienne de la relance économique pour proches aidantes, et d'augmenter de 2 semaines la durée maximale de chaque prestation. Bill C2 is designed with an understanding that our economic recovery is still uneven and that the public health measures that are saving lives continue to restrict some economic activity. Among the bill's measures is a new income benefit, which recognizes that the public health situation continues to be uncertain and unpredictable. The Canada Worker Lockdown Benefit. It will provide $300 a week to workers who are directly affected by a COVID-19 related local lockdown and will be available to eligible workers retroactively to October 24th and through to May 7, 2022. The bill also proposes to extend eligibility for both the Canada Sickness Benefit and the Canada Caregiving Benefit until May 7, 2022, and increase the maximum duration of each benefit by 2 additional weeks. And we want to make sure that businesses can continue to grow and recover and drive up Canada's labour force participation rates and our level of employment. That's why we're proposing to extend the Canada Recovery Hiring Program until May 7th, 2022, and increase the rate of support to 50%. This will encourage businesses to hire back workers, increase workers' hours, and create new jobs. We also know that there are some businesses that have been most deeply affected by the pandemic and that continue to face significant pandemic-related challenges. Le nouveau programme de relance pour le tourisme et l'accueil offrira aux employeurs comme les hôtels, les restaurants, les agences du voyage et les voyagistes des subventions salariales et des subventions pour le loyer pouvant atteindre 75%. Le projet de loi comprend des détails sur les types d'entreprises qui seraient admissibles de programme. Nous avons également publié une note d'information aujourd'hui pour donner aux entreprises les précisions dont elles ont besoin. For businesses in all sectors, the hardest hit business recovery program will provide support through wage and rent subsidies to employers who have experienced deep and enduring losses during the pandemic with a subsidy rate of up to 50%. The local lockdown program will be there to provide employers facing temporary new local lockdowns with a subsidy rate of up to 75% through the wage and rent subsidy programs. This is really important because it will ensure that local authorities and public health officials can continue to make the right public health choices, knowing that the support will be there for workers and businesses. And we will continue to have measures in place such that any publicly listed corporation that chooses to increase executive pay while receiving government support will have the wage subsidy support clawed back. We estimate the total cost of the measures in the bill will be approximately $7.4 billion. This is a meaningful and intentional fiscal pivot. The broad-based set of support measures, which we introduced at the height of the pandemic and which came to an end on October 23rd, had an estimated cost of $289 billion. Fighting COVID and the subsequent lockdowns we put in place to save lives required unprecedented government spending in Canada and around the world. Canadians supported that extraordinary spending because they understood that it was not only the compassionate thing to do, it was the right thing to do economically. As of last month, Canada has recovered 101% of the jobs lost to the COVID recession, compared to just 81% of jobs recovered in the United States. And today, there are more active businesses in Canada than there were before the pandemic hit. Thanks in large part to our government's support measures, we have avoided the sort of deep economic scarring that followed the 2008 recession and that would have done permanent damage to our economy. Le projet de loi C2 nous permettra de continuer à être là pour les Canadiens et Canadiennes tout en offrant un soutien plus ciblé et à gérer prudemment les finances publiques. J'espère que tous les députés voteront pour l'adoption de ce projet de loi afin que les Canadiens et Canadiennes qui ont besoin de soutien puissent y avoir accès le plus rapidement possible. Finally, I just want to reiterate and emphasize as forcefully as possible that the single most important economic policy for Canada continues to be to make sure everyone who can get vaccinated does get vaccinated. We have one of the highest vaccination rates in the world, with nearly 89% of Canadians 12 and older having received at least one dose. And We have the second lowest mortality rate in the G7. Children between 5 and 11 have started getting vaccinated this week. That is wonderful news. And many of our parents and grandparents are now getting their third booster shot. And speaking as a daughter, I can say what a relief that is. And I think that's true for a lot of Canadians. Let's really work hard to be sure everyone gets the vaccines they're eligible for. Speaking as Canada's finance minister, it is so important for us to do that, not only for our health, but also for our economy. As a country, we can be proud of how we've come together to fight COVID-19. Our battle is not quite finished yet, but we're getting there. The measures in this legislation introduced today are an important part of what we need to do to get the job done. Thank you. And now we will hear from my colleague, Carla Qualtrough. Carla.
Thank you very much. Hello, bonjour tout le monde. Je suis contente d'être ici aujourd'hui avec le vice-premier ministre et le ministère des Finances pour parler du nouveau projet de loi que nous avons déposé au Parlement aujourd'hui. I'd like to echo what the Deputy Prime Minister said about the current labor market. The simplified employment insurance measures and suite of recovery measures and benefits that we introduced last fall were designed to address the economic and public health realities of September 2020. Those realities are different today. We have vaccines, including for children. We have a trending up of job openings. We know that when jobs are available, people are taking them. The time is right for us to move from the very broad-based support that was appropriate at the height of our lockdowns to more targeted measures that will provide help where it's needed. We're trying to strike a balance between stoking our economic recovery and helping people who still need it. As Canadians always need support when they lose their jobs or if they suffer a significant reduction in their income. Pardon me, today's bill reflects our current reality. If passed in Parliament, the Canada Worker Lockdown Benefit would support Canadians in regions designated as being in lockdown. The Governor and Council would be empowered to designate the regions where these lockdowns occur. It's modeled after the Canada Recovery Benefit. It'd be a benefit of $300 a week and available for the entire duration of a lockdown. It'd be retroactive to October 24, 2021, and would be available up until May 7, 2022. Nous voulons également continuer à soutenir les Canadiens lorsqu'ils doivent rester à la maison parce qu'ils ont contracté la COVID-19 ou qu'ils doivent s'isoler. Nous ne voulons pas que les gens se présentent malades au travail. Nous devons assurer que nos lieux de travail soient sains et sûrs. Nous savons également que les travailleurs canadiens devront continuer à rester à la maison pour prendre soin de leurs proches qui sont touchés par la COVID-19. C'est pourquoi nous augmentons le nombre de semaines de prestations offertes dans le cadre de la prestation canadienne de la relance économique pour proches aidants et de la prestation canadienne de maladie pour la relance économique, qui seront tous les deux offerts aux Canadiens jusqu'au 7 mai 2022. The tabling of this new bill is also happening in the context of larger EI reform efforts that are ongoing. Current temporary measures in place for EI allow workers, including those impacted by the floods in BC, for example, to qualify for EI benefits with only 420 hours and receive a minimum of 14 weeks of benefits based on current EI rules. To ensure the EI program better aligns with the realities of today's labor market and workforce, Budget 2021 announced $5 million over 2 years, starting in 2021-2022, to conduct consultations with Canadian stakeholders and individuals from across the country on the future, longer-term EI improvements. This consultation process will help the Government of Canada to better understand the perspectives of workers and employers who would be impacted by changes to the EI program. It will also look at gaps highlighted by COVID-19, such as the need for income support for self-employed and gig workers, how best to support Canadians through different life events such as adoption, and how to provide more consistent and reliable benefits to workers in seasonal industries. Entre-temps, nous continuerons à surveiller la situation de la santé publique et du marché du travail et à adapter nos mesures de soutien aux besoins. And now we'd be happy to take your questions.
Merci beaucoup, Mesdames les ministres. And we'll now take questions for a little bit more than 20 minutes. We'll start with the Globe and Mail.
Great. Bill Curry from the Globe and Mail. I'd just like to point out it'd be better if we actually had a copy of the bill. We still don't have a copy of the bill, even though it's been tabled a while ago. Can either of you please clear up what is new in what you're announcing today compared to the announcement in October? It appears that some sectors, like cultural sector, have been moved into the more generous tourism and hospitality program. But if that's the case, why is the total cost still $7.4 billion?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So what is the additional information being released today is when we made the announcement in October, we didn't specify with complete precision which were the businesses that would be included in the most generous tourism and hospitality category. And the idea, the thinking behind that category is to look at which are the parts of the economy where, because of COVID-related rules, whether that is border measures or capacity restrictions, they are simply unable to operate at 100%. And to say, okay, these sectors need additional support because, following the logic that we applied from the beginning of the lockdowns, when we, for public health reasons, impose a lockdown on the economy, it's appropriate for the government to be there to provide support for businesses and people who can't work because of that. So when we announced the measures in October, we said where we can actually identify and target specific categories of business activity using specific business codes that we have, we're going to identify those. We're going to say those are the ones who get this tourism and hospitality most generous coverage. And what we are sharing with Canadians today is who falls in that category. What has happened since our announcement is we had a process of consultation. We made the basic announcement and we said, this is the approach we're taking. And then we talked to a lot of people. We talked to stakeholders, we talked to businesses. We said, you know, who do we believe falls into this category? And we are presenting today, and you guys have the background materials, that very detailed list.
Okay.
And I don't know, Carla, if you have anything you want to add.
No, that's fine.
Okay, great. Thank you. And on another topic, since we have you here, Minister Freeland, your conservative critic has been taking issue with your plans for over $100 billion in spending, saying that this is inflationary spending and that you should be scaling that back. Can you tell us how you respond to that, and when are we going to see a fiscal update in the fall, hopefully, that will outline your plans on the fiscal track?
Okay, that's a couple of questions in there, but I will, let me try to answer them. So first of all, on inflation, I think it's really important to start with the reality that I know Canadians are aware of, which is the whole world is experiencing higher inflation, and families around the world are therefore experiencing real challenges with affordability. What we're seeing around the world is supply chain bottlenecks. We are seeing higher energy prices. Energy is a global commodity, so when those prices are higher in one country, they are higher around the world. And we're seeing a basic challenge that shutting down the world's economy turned out to be a much simpler process than turning the global economy back on. A metaphor that some economists have used in conversations with me is it's like when there is a car accident and you have a traffic jam on the highway. The accident happens, all the cars around stop, and you have a traffic jam. But then even after the accident is cleared away, it takes a while for the traffic to start to move freely. There are inevitably bottlenecks, and that is part of what we are seeing. And I do really want to emphasize the extent to which this is something being experienced around the world. Just this morning, I had a conversation with Christine Lagarde of the ECB, just to get her perspective on precisely these issues. I've recently been at G20 and IMF World Bank meetings with finance ministers from around the world. I saw Janet Yellen in Washington last week. And really, this challenge of reopening national economies and the world economy and some of the inflationary aspects we're seeing really is a shared challenge around the world. Specifically in Canada, that is why the structural measures, some of which we put in place in the budget in April, are so important. Structural measures that are about making life more affordable for Canadian families, and structural measures that are about boosting our country's long-term growth potential. I am speaking specifically about childcare. The economists in the Department of Finance calculated that the long-term boost to Canada's GDP from a national early learning and childcare program is as great as the NAFTA trade deal. I'm a Toronto MP. Once we get early learning and childcare in place in Toronto, it's going to save Toronto families up to $20,000, well, $19,000 to be precise, per child. That's a lot of money. That will make life a lot more affordable. And in the speech from the throne, we spoke about housing and a real push on housing. That was a centerpiece of our election campaign. So those are big structural programs that we are putting in place already, that we're going to continue to put in place, that will directly target this affordability challenge and also increase Canada's economic growth potential. So, look, we know how important it is to be transparent with Canadians about the public finances and to update them regularly. We will release some form of fiscal update this fall, and we'll have more specifics to share with you in the coming days.
Bonjour, Mme Freeland. Boris Proulx du Devoir. Avez-vous une copie avec vous du projet de loi?
Je pense que oui, mais il y a beaucoup de commentaires écrits de ma main sur ce projet de loi. Mon équipe est ici. Oui. Et on va, juste après la conférence de presse, de parler avec vous et de partager le projet de loi avec vous.
Après vous avoir posé les questions. D'habitude, ça se fait dans l'autre sens. Hein. Vous avez été journaliste, je crois que vous le savez. Il n'y a rien dans ça sur vos promesses pour les artistes, comme vous le savez. Est-ce que c'est que les artistes doivent attendre après la réforme de l'assurance-emploi ou il va y avoir quelque chose entre-temps? Pouvez-vous en dire plus?
Si Carla veut dire quelque chose, et je peux ajouter si nécessaire.
Notre collègue, le ministre Rodriguez, travaille très fort sur cet enjeu. C'est très important pour lui, pour nos collègues de Québec particulièrement, mais pour tous les Canadiens, tous les artistes au Canada. Les business, excuse-moi, qui sont incorporés ont accès aux programmes qui sont dans ce projet de loi, mais l'argent direct aux individus, on n'a pas à ce moment une solution, mais on travaille très fort là-dessus.
Oui, non, c'est précisément, si je peux ajouter, ce que Carla a dit est évidemment correct. On a pris un engagement direct et précis pendant la campagne électorale quand nous avons annoncé les changements dans les programmes de l'appui pour les gens et pour les entreprises en octobre. Moi et le Premier ministre, on était encore une fois clairs qu'on aura en addition un appui ciblé pour les travailleurs du secteur culturel. Pablo Rodriguez est en train de préciser les détails de ce programme. Et pour rassurer peut-être les travailleurs du secteur culturel, je sais que il connaît Pablo très très bien, mais aussi nous avons maintenant dans notre équipe Pascal Saint-Onge qui connaît le secteur et les travailleurs de ce secteur très très bien et elle est aussi très impliquée dans le travail. Alors on va le faire, on est en train de préciser les détails et on va Pablo va les annoncer dans les prochains jours. Parce que la façon de donner cette aide directement aux travailleurs du secteur culturel, c'est un peu compliqué. Et quand on a fait l'annonce en octobre de ce changement, le Premier ministre n'a pas encore annoncé le nouveau cabinet, mais Pablo maintenant est en place. Et je peux vous assurer, j'ai discuté ça quelques fois aujourd'hui avec Pablo. Je pense que Pablo a fait la même Carla a fait la même chose. J'ai beaucoup de confiance en Pablo. Je sais qu'il est très engagé. Et la chose la plus importante, peut-être pour rassurer les travailleurs du secteur culturel, on veut faire ça. Et on a pris l'engagement. C'est une chose sérieuse pour nous et on va le faire.
Hi, Minister Qualtrough. The NDP have been pushing to have GIS clawbacks ended and child benefits reassessed for people who are getting a lot less because they got a pandemic benefit before. The PM said today that ministers are working on a solution. So does that mean that your government sees this as a problem? And what exactly is this work that you're doing on this?
Really important question, thank you. So as you know, GIS is assessed annually based on the previous year's income. And because CERB was deemed employment insurance replacement income that was taxable, it was considered income for the purpose of GIS calculation this year, meaning technically that individuals had more income in 2020 than they may have had in 2019. And as a result, some are seeing reduction or even elimination of GIS for this year based on that last year's income. So this is, it is a more complicated issue than one would think because there's serious kind of fairness and equity issues for people who may have earned similar amounts in employment income. If a senior worked last year and made an equivalent amount, they too would have lost their GIS or had their GIS potentially reduced. And so we're working on a path forward that recognizes this, and doesn't want to create a potential inequity. We know how many people are facing this. It's a function, unfortunately, of an antiquated system that doesn't look at your real-time situation, but looks at last year's income. So we're working on that too, and we'll have more to say to that in the days to come. But certainly, we are very, very alive to this issue.
Yeah, I did have a follow-up, but you didn't mention the child benefit.
Well, thank you. So we have looked into the child benefit, and that is absolutely part of the deliberations. Quite frankly, the way the child benefit is calculated, the consequences are not quite as severe financially, although they are impactful. So yes, that's part of the mix as well. I apologize. I should have said that.
No worries. And also just the Canadian Press had that briefing note from May that had raised this particular issue. That was before people had the baby bonus assessed. I'm wondering why your government didn't address this issue over the past 6 months.
Well, this is actually a function of people having filed their taxes and the kind of as a regular course, the GIS not being assessed until June and based on tax filings from last year. And the way CRA, I apologize, it's super technical and maybe we need a technical briefing, but it's how CRA codes the way people claim their income. And so we have been working on it, is what I would say is the short answer. But again, we're really mindful of the potential fairness and inequities that we could inadvertently be creating by relieving some people's obligation and penalizing someone who may have picked up extra hours during the pandemic as an opportunity, and now their ineligibility weighed against somebody with CERB could be consequential. So we're really rolling up our sleeves and putting our mind to this, but the path forward hasn't yet been figured out.
Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia CTV National News. Have you spoken to other parties to ensure their support for this bill so it can get passed quickly? Or are you going to be asking for unanimous consent to get this done quickly? Are there any trade-offs the government is willing to make to get other parties' support?
Thanks for the question. Unanimous consent is a great idea, and that would be wonderful. I have personally and my colleagues in the House leadership also have been speaking very energetically with many MPs from opposition parties, and we've provided a technical briefing. So yes, absolutely, we are speaking to MPs from other parties. And I will say, you know, I see this legislation as very much the last step in our COVID support programs. It is what I really hope and truly believe is the final pivot. I think Canadians appreciated the fact that in peak COVID, when this, you know, unprecedented situation hit our country, the deepest crisis since the Second World War, Canadians saw that both in Parliament and across the country, we were able to set aside partisan differences and really just address this national emergency. And I really hope that it is in that spirit that the opposition parties will approach this legislation and see this not in any way as business as usual, but as really urgent support that we need to get through this last phase of COVID. And one element of these programs that I would really underscore as being particularly important is the tools that we have put in here to provide lockdown support in the event of additional lockdowns. I really, really hope those will not be necessary. And that is why I emphasize the need for all of us to get vaccinated, to follow public health rules. But anyone who is following the news from Europe can see that a further COVID wave is possible. And so I really think that it's important for all of us in Parliament to work together to be sure that we have the tools to provide necessary support in the event of an unpredictable situation. I also just want to take this opportunity, and a note has been passed to me with this detail. A couple of journalists here have asked to see the legislation. This is something that the House of Commons administration uploads to the House of Commons website. I'm sure that they are uploading it as quickly as possible. They have a hard job to do, and this is the first week back in Parliament, and they have a lot of MPs they're dealing with in a COVID situation, which makes life particularly challenging. We have been in touch with the House just since the questions were asked, pointing out that journalists do need access to the full legislation. So please check the website. I don't have my devices with me now, but not there yet. Okay, well, we've asked them to do it urgently, and the backgrounders, you know, are produced by the Department of Finance. They are there. They faithfully reflect the details that are in the legislation, I can assure you. Okay, sorry.
No, thank you for that answer. I wanted to ask the Prime Minister this today. He wasn't available. While we have you here, Deputy Prime Minister, I want to ask this question. This is with regards to the events that has been happening in BC. Do you think RCMP axes going through cabins with automatic rifles drawn towards Indigenous women in Wet'suwet'en territory is true reconciliation?
I am going to give Carla a chance to address the situation in BC because we have a BC minister with us. But let me just start by addressing the really difficult and desperate flooding situation in BC. And let me say to everyone who is there that we, the federal government, really do appreciate how devastating the situation is for so many people, for so many families. Our BC ministers have played a particularly important role, and you'll hear from one of them in a minute. And I just do want to assure all the people of BC, particularly affected communities, families, farmers, that we are there for you now. The armed forces are there. We will continue to be there now. And look, when it comes to reconciliation, this is a huge challenge for our whole country. I think it's important for us all to recognize that we still have a long way to go as a country when it comes to walking the path of reconciliation. This was a relationship that has been broken and damage that has been done over many, many years. And we have a lot more work to do. Carla?
Thank you. So the situation in BC is bad. People are worried and uncertain. We have these floods in the context of all of us going through a pandemic, many of us going through wildfires and a heat wave. And there's a lot of uncertainty. What I can assure everyone is that the governments of BC and Canada are working hand in hand. In fact, having sat on cabinet committees, unfortunately, for a number of these incidences, whether it be wildfires or others, I can tell you that I've never seen such a close and productive and real-time response than this one in terms of us mobilizing our, whether it be in response to the request for Canadian Armed Forces, whether it be the Red Cross involvement or other requests for modifications to the EI system. We are really working well and productively together for the benefit of BC, but all of Canada. And I guess what I would say is we are a long way in BC from being where we were a week and a half or 2 weeks ago. And this is going to take time, and we are going to be there as a federal government every step of the way.
No, it wasn't. It was regarding Wet'suwet'en and what's been happening there with the Indigenous people there who, the footage was just released today of RCMP breaking down the cabin doors with axes and rifles drawn towards them.
Yeah, I think it would be inappropriate to talk about BC without talking about the devastation the people of BC are experiencing from the flooding, and without taking this opportunity to assure people in BC that we're here for them. And I spoke about the real challenges we face when it comes to reconciliation.
We have 2 more people on the floor. Just a reminder to keep your answers and questions short, please. Merci.
Raisa Patel, the Toronto Star. The NDP, for example, has said that their support for this bill that you introduced today hinges on things like ending clawbacks affecting seniors and families. We haven't seen the text of this bill, but is that something that you're open to?
I'm so sorry. Would you mind just repeating the question right close to the mic?
Sure.
It was very hard to hear you.
Yes. So we've heard the NDP, for example, saying that their support for the bill that you introduced today may hinge on stipulations like ending clawbacks for seniors and families. We haven't seen the text of the bill, but is that something that you're open to?
I mean, Carla has already spoken to the GIS issue. Do you want to go at that again?
The bill itself does not address that issue. It's focused squarely on business and income support in this last, as the Deputy Prime Minister said, pivot, which doesn't mean that we're not working with other parties on other issues that they've identified as a priority to them, the artist, cultural payments, which is also a priority for us, as is the GIS CERB. So there's a lot going on right now, I can tell you. But that it is not in the actual kind of substance of the bill.
And a second question for Minister Qualtrough. When it comes to unemployment during the pandemic, we've seen young Canadians get hit particularly hard, especially those from marginalized groups. Is youth unemployment going to be a focus of your new mandate?
I suspect so. Absolutely. We know that, in fact, it's been top of mind both for the Deputy Prime Minister and I since the beginning, the risk of losing a generation to this pandemic economically and from a prosperity point of view. And so as we recover from this, we will invest in training. We have improved the Canada Student Loan Program. We are, tripling the Canada Summer Jobs, the Youth Employment Skills Strategy, all of that remains a big priority for our government, and I can assure you that that hasn't changed, and I suspect will only be torqued.
Greg Quinn, Market News International. Minister Freeland, you've scaled back the main support programs through COVID. I'm wondering, at times, the government has spoken in sweeping terms about building back a better economy, a multi-year plan of deficits. Given the inflation risks we're seeing now, do you think we might get to a point where deficit spending might have to be pulled in a little bit more to make sure inflation does not get further up there?
Look, I've already spoken about inflation, and I do think it's important for us to proceed from two core realities. One reality is that the inflationary environment we are seeing in Canada today is very much being experienced around the world. And we are subject to a number of very powerful drivers of that environment, which are not made in Canada. The supply chain bottlenecks, the higher energy prices, the simple, and actually, in fact, very not simple, complicated reality of the challenges of turning back on the global economy. Those are not made in Canada factors. And so it follows logically that looking for a made in Canada answer, when those are the drivers, is to be looking for the wrong tools. The second reality I think we have to bear in mind, and that our government is very, very focused on, and actually we have been since 2015, is what is life like for middle-class Canadian families? And the reality is affordability is a challenge for middle-class Canadian families. I am a mother of 3. I'm not going to cook supper for my kids tonight because I'm going to be in Ottawa, but I'm going to cook supper for them on Saturday. I go to the grocery store whenever I'm home. I know that the challenge today is real. So our government is focused on that, and that is why the structural policies we have put in place to provide some real structural support on affordability for Canadian families is so important. And the final thing I'll say about Canada's fiscal track is it's worth pointing out that just over the past few weeks, our AAA credit rating, the gold standard internationally, has been reaffirmed by both S&P and Moody's. These are objective, outside analysts who take a look at Canada's fiscal track, who take a look at the strength of our economy, and they have reaffirmed our AAA credit rating. They believe our fiscal position is absolutely sustainable. And if you look at their reports, you will see that the support the government provided during COVID and the fact that that support helped us to avoid economic scarring is a source of economic strength, according to these ratings agencies. And then finally, let me just remind people that the fiscal track we presented in the budget in April was prudent and careful. And that's why the ratings agencies have reaffirmed our AAA rating. It showed a steadily declining debt to GDP ratio. And that is important, and that's something our government is looking at closely.
Further on inflation, you may already have a letter on your desk from the Bank of Canada on renewing its inflation target. Inflation is a big deal right now. There's been some debate about having a narrow focus on just fighting inflation or incorporating other things like a jobs mandate, looking at climate change or housing risks. Do you have any preliminary views on whether they should stick very tightly to what they're doing now or whether they could get a bit more expansionary in their vision?
I have many views on that issue, but I don't think that now is the moment to share those views. It is, a really, really important issue. It is one which I am pleased to see has been publicly discussed and debated in a number of forums by independent Canadian economists. The bank has led a really, really rigorous process discussing this question. The mandate review of the Bank of Canada that happens every 5 years is an important economic moment, and a lot of really smart people have a lot of really smart and often divergent ideas. It's something we're considering really thoughtfully and really, really carefully in discussion with the really hardworking professionals at the Bank of Canada.
Parfait. Merci beaucoup. Ceci met fin à la conférence de presse. This ends the press conference. Thank you, ministers.
Merci beaucoup. Has it been uploaded by the House of Commons website? OK, j'ai vu le souris, même avec la masque, j'ai vu. OK, c'est bon. Merci. Merci beaucoup.